Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give everyone just a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. All right, hello and welcome everyone. You are tuning into a SACOG hosted webinar on performance measurement in TDM, or Transportation Demand Management. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. All of the attendees are on mute, so if you do have a question, please type that into the chat box at any time. This webinar is being recorded and will both be emailed to attendees and posted on the SACOG website for your reference. Again, please send your questions at any time. Today, we'll be hearing how you can measure the VMT reductions resulting from your TDM activities, and we will hear from panelists from ALTA Planning and Design, the San Diego Council of Governments, and SACOG. I am your moderator, Adrienne Moretz, and today with us, we have Jessica Roberts, Rachel Forseth, and Sabrina Bradbury. So without further ado, I'm going to transition to Jessica Roberts, who is with ALTA Planning and Design. Jessica specializes in education, promotion, and marketing programs, including individualized marketing, safe routes to school programs, and TDM. Jessica has written grant applications that have resulted in over $23 million in grant awards for clients, and she lives a car-free lifestyle. So I'm going to transition the screen to Jessica, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great. All right. And we'll show my screen. If someone can just confirm when you can see it, I will get started.
Yep. Looks great. Thank you.
Great. Excellent. As Adrienne said, I'm Jessica Roberts with ALTA Planning and Design, and I manage a team of people who all are working on transportation behavior change campaigns. And I'm going to call out that term campaign specifically because there's a lot of transportation demand management types of programs that are simply ongoing. Maybe you might say the work of a transportation management association might be a good example of that. And those are terrific programs, but they require a different kind of evaluation. But when you are doing something that has a start date and an end date, you have a unique opportunity to do some, I think, more enhanced evaluation because you can get a baseline and a post program. It's very simple, right? So in the context of that idea of behavior change campaigns, and specifically looking at the type of work that my team does, which is often around residential transportation demand management or individualized marketing campaigns, it's okay if you don't know all the details of that, and I don't think I want to spend the time working on that, but suffice it to say it's a type of intensive residential campaign intended to help people drive alone less often and walk, bike, and take transit more often. Our industry has been doing the same sort of pre and post trip diaries and surveys for a long time, and they're very good compared to, I think, a lot of evaluation that is done in our field. And also, after 12 years of doing that, I had become a little bit dissatisfied with some of the limitations of the status quo. And so, as a consultant, you can imagine I don't just get to work on whatever I want. I have to wait for a public agency to ask for it. So this was something I had really been frustrated with for a number of years. And then we uniquely had the opportunity to pitch Transit Center, which is a terrific urban mobility think tank out of New York. I recommend you follow them. I think they're terrific. But we got to pitch them on funding some research for the benefit of practitioners like ourselves. And what I'm going to present to you today is the results of that research. And the goal of the entire research was to come away with ideas that really you can do yourself. So you should not have to hire a consultant to do this work. You should not have to buy specialized software or require specialized training. We wanted, things that could be used today by people like me and hopefully people like you if you're listening on the phone. So we convene an advisory council. You can see who's on that in case that's of interest to you. We interviewed a lot of both evaluation experts, but in transportation demand management, but we also talked to other fields like climate change, business and economic development, public health, and behavioral change science in general. Did a lit review and all of that. And I'm going to jump, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to what we ended up calling our 7 protocols. And that's a fairly vague word on purpose because they're not necessarily all like tools or methods. They're sort of a grab bag of enhancements that you could cobble together or use separately. So the first one I want to talk about is logic models. And if any of you have worked in public health, this is probably not a radically new idea to you, but me coming up in the world of transportation demand management and active transportation, this was something I was only slightly familiar with, but it's really very simple. The idea is that we are making assumptions about why we're doing the things that we're doing to accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish. So in the case of my programs, as I said, that would be people driving alone less often and walking, biking, and taking transit more often. And then I do certain program activities because I believe that they lead to that behavior change. A logic model is simply a formalized, written down way of articulating your assumptions about the connection between the activities that you do and the results that you want. There are slightly different ways of slicing and dicing this, but what we're presenting is pretty standard. You would lay out a list of your resources, or sometimes called inputs. It might be staff time, it might be the ability to print materials, or the ability or lack thereof to get incentives. It might be partnerships, it might be existing email lists, any kind of resources available to you. Next, you write down the activities you're going to do with them. Third are the outputs you're going to expect out of that. This is where a lot of TDM evaluation stops, unfortunately, but we all spell them out, that this number of participants, or we distributed X newsletters, or so many people visited our website, which is great, but only if we make the explicit connection between why those outputs we think are likely to lead to certain outcomes. So that might be like, well, they took our newsletter, and the outcome from that was that they learned more about the options available to them. And the impact that had was that allowed them to start taking the bus instead of driving to work. So the impact is like the ultimate societal impact, the result of the program. I want to point out that a logic model is actually not really an evaluation tool. It's really more of a program design tool and or a way to sort of defend your proposal to, in particular, funders or higher ups. However, in our experience, the process of putting together a logic model leads really gracefully to a thoughtful evaluation program. So don't be scared, but I'm going to go to the next slide, which is pretty big. This is one we did for a typical Smart Trips or individualized marketing program, and you can just glance at it, but you can see, the resources, for example, we have some grant funding, the activities, we're going to do community outreach, we're going to organize events. The outputs would be like, all of the numbers. You can see in this case, we've broken into short-term, intermediate, and long-term outcomes, and then results. But what I want to point out is not that in this webinar, we don't need to understand and discuss every one of these boxes. But what I want to point out is that you should take the opportunity to challenge yourself to say, are we tracking each one of these, or how would we evaluate if that happened? So under outputs, this is a good reminder to us that, for example, if we're tracking the number of newsletters we send, but we're not tracking the number of social media posts we put out there and the number of, let's say, likes, follows, and replies we get, we're missing an opportunity to gather that quantitative data. Likewise, if we think the outcome is increasing knowledge and awareness of travel options, here, I'll put my cursor there for you. Well, we ought to be asking that in our post-program survey. Did, in fact, people increase their knowledge and awareness of travel options? And then, moving to other outcomes, did they make fewer drive-alone trips? And in the longer run, what did that change sustain? So we propose that logic models are an excellent tool for holding ourselves accountable to the best possible evaluation we can do. The next thing I want to talk about is stages of change, which is a behavior change theory that comes from academia. It sometimes is called the much less accessible name, the trans-theoretical model, if any of you have ever heard of that. Again, this is something that you may not formally know, but it will probably resonate with you intuitively. The idea is that unless we understand people's attitudes and feelings about the behavior that we want them to change, we won't be able to successfully give them the tools or nudges or messages that will motivate them. And the idea is that people can be in one of 5 stages. Pre-contemplation here, I'm going to skip to the next one. So in the context of transportation demand management, that would be pre-contemplation, meaning I drive everywhere and I'm happy doing it, go away. Contemplation, meaning like driving is getting worse every year, or boy, my gas bill is high, or my doctor wants me to get more exercise. Maybe the status quo isn't working. But they still aren't ready to consider making a change. In preparation, they're actually saying, okay, I don't want to keep doing what I've been doing. I want to walk more or bike more or take transit more, or maybe even just drive less. And then the action stage is when they're in preparation, they're also gathering information about how to successfully do the new behavior. In action, they're trying it out, but it hasn't yet become a habit, and small setbacks, like let's say a rainy day or the day's getting shorter, might cause them to relapse. And then maintenance phase is I've shifted my behavior. I no longer have to think about it. It is sustainable for me. So in the context of evaluation, this obviously has a lot of great implications for program design, right? But in the context of evaluation, assessing which stage people are in at the beginning and at the end of your program, we think has great potential to reveal good work that you've done that hasn't yet gotten to the level where you would see it with your more traditional evaluation methods. So as an example, let's say, 5% of people who participated in my program shifted from the contemplation phase to the preparation phase through our program. Even in the preparation phase, they aren't yet doing everything, they haven't quite gotten there on behavior change. But that's good work that we've done, and they are closer and more ready to that behavior change than they were before. So by showing how many people we move from one stage to the next, we are revealing the ways that our program is having an impact, even if maybe it's going to take longer for us to see that as permanently changed behavior, or some of our evaluation methods might not validate like the occasional trip made by a new mode. They might only be looking, let's say, for have you changed your commute mode. But if someone has started taking, leaving the car at home for trips to the library, trips to the corner store, that's really terrific. And a stages of change analysis can reveal that sort of hidden benefit to you. There's a lot more to say about this, but I'm going to move on for now. We also identified the ways that mobile apps and wearables are getting us closer and closer to being able to include passive behavior change tracking in our programs. As you probably know, if you've ever tried to do let's say paper-based or even online trip diary before and after, we're really asking a lot of people to say, okay, think back to yesterday, think about every single trip you made, how did you make it, what was the trip purpose, what was the length. People might forget trips. It's very easy to sort of forget those interstitial trips, or they might report linked trips wrong, or they might just be really bad at estimating trip distance. Plus, there can be simply the burden of them having to report that. I have to do a lot of bribing of people to complete trip diaries for me. It would be great if we could use those incentive resources to actually get a behavior change instead of just reporting. So the idea of passive tracking is really exciting. However, certainly at the time when we published the survey, which was last fall, and I would say, as far as I know still today, we can do fairly successful passive tracking for bicycling. However, walking and especially transit use, as you can imagine, are simply not there. There are groups that are trying to crack that problem. I know Ride Amigos keeps talking a really big game about how they're about to be able to tell the difference between trips that are made by personal automobile and transit, but I've still heard a lot of reports that we're not quite there yet. So our takeaway on this one is watch this space. And if you're doing a bicycling specific program, there are a lot of really great opportunities. So you can simply connect your program. You can have participants authorize a program or an app or a wearable they already use to report that data to your program instead of them needing to download some special new thing. So for example, if you use Ride Report already or Strava, you can simply authorize through a web API that your program could receive that data. So if you're doing a bicycling program, I really encourage you to look into this. But if, like me, most of your programs are multimodal, we're not there yet, but the potential is enormous. And then I want to talk a little bit about A/B testing. This is, I think an idea we're all familiar with, where you take all of the people that are in whatever audience you want to reach, and you randomly put them into, let's say, treatment groups. This is sort of clinical language, right? And then you, let's say you would do your business as usual with your first group, and you would try something new with your second group. So for example, maybe you're spending a lot of money on postage paid reply devices for one of your programs, and you're asking yourself, is it worth the cost of that? Well, you could send the exact same package to half your people with no postage paid reply device. You definitely have fewer people returning it, but at the end you could figure out, but is that offset by the money you saved in that postage? Just as one example. This also is not going to tell you what the impact of your program was, but what it can help you do is optimize elements of your program. I just gave you the example of some specific aspect of your mail-based program. You could use A/B testing to figure out the timing of a message, the message itself. You might test a health message against, let's say, a social norming message. You could use it to test the different media, like maybe you might do, a letter compared to a postcard or something like that. So we see a lot of potential for using A/B testing to optimize elements of a given program. And I'm going to get into the details of this, but I will point you to the report at the end. And if you're in the business of trip diary kind of surveys, I really encourage you to read the section on sample size and design and also analysis methods, because there are a lot of best practices that we sort of honed in the course of doing this research. I will come back to that slide. And then we also, the big takeaway, Adrian asked me to have one big takeaway. And my one big takeaway I'd like to communicate to you is that those of us whose goal is to reduce driving, whether that's expressed as vehicle miles reduced or whether it's expressed as a mode shift or in some other way. Those are important goals. We should continue to assess them as directly as possible and report on them transparently. However, I also believe that the value of the types of programs that we're all running goes beyond simply that sort of congestion mitigation or mode shift impact. And that unless we are assessing some of those other factors, we're really missing out on the chance to tell a deeper, richer story about the benefits of these types of investments. And if we start telling those stories, I think we will attract partnerships, support, and funding from a broader variety of, let's say, economic development and health partners. So I'm not going to go through each one of these, but we came up with 4 categories of new or additional types of measures that you could be assessing, and we gave example specific language that you could drop into surveys around different aspects of travel behavior besides just vehicle miles reduced. Community metrics, so this might be like your economic development, like are we supporting local businesses better? Community connectedness, are we decreasing social isolation? Are we helping people feel more connected to their neighbors? Are we building social capacity? And health outcomes. So for example, for one of our individualized marketing programs, we did the usual trip diary-based VMR reduction, but we also were able to use this ITEM integrated, I should look it up, integrated transport and health impact model assessment. And we're able to calculate, this is very, very, very well researched, so it's really defensible. We were able to calculate that our program had over $191,000 worth of health savings to participants. Those are some big numbers compared to the cost of these programs. So you can really start to make an ROI argument that's I think, much more compelling. And we also did you all the favor of giving you some unit, once you have your vehicle miles reduced or figure, you can just apply these multipliers to get at a reduced vehicle ownership costs and several metrics associated with crashes and congestion. So the report will give you these figures and you can just use that as sort of your bonus, like you already got your VMR number, so let's get you some more credit for some of the other things. That's my whirlwind trip through the report. I've tried to give you a short link up here in the upper right, and perhaps if Adrian sends out a follow-up, we can give you a link to the report there as well. But I hope you find some of these ideas interesting. I hope you apply them, and I would dearly love to hear if you give them a try, how they worked for you, and if you're going to keep using them. So in other words, send me your final reports.
Great, Jessica, thank you, and I appreciate you going through all of those methods so quickly, but I again just want to emphasize Jessica's point is that all of these are detailed in the report they put out with Transit Center, and it also really kind of details and talks about individualized marketing and what that is, and I think such a crucial component, like Jessica said, to tell more of the story. So with that, we're going to transition to the San Diego Council of Governments and talk about some specific employer outreach they do. Rachel Forseth is a consultant at Steer Davies Cleave, and as her role as an employer outreach account executive, she liaises between SANDAG's communications and TDM team to integrate employer outreach with TDM messaging and planning. And she works on behavior change and sustainable transportation campaigns. So Jessica, I'm going to transition the screen away from you and to Rachel.
All right. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Great. That was really fascinating, Jessica. Thanks. And yeah, my presentation actually coincides pretty neatly with what Jessica just overviewed, but perhaps it's less technical and more on kind of the arts and humanities side of TDM. But it's nice to virtually meet all of you. My name is Rachel, and I work for Steer Davies Cleave. You can call us STG. For those of you that haven't heard of us, we specialize in planning, TDM, and behavior change. And today I'm going to focus on our partnership and some work done with the San Diego Association of Governments, which is the regional planning group down south. You guys have SACOG up there, and we have SANDAG. So for a bit of background, iCommute is a TDM program And like many others throughout your county, the focus is heavily on employer outreach and education. TDM fits in with the regional goals to reduce congestion and emissions and enhance the quality of life in a city that is not terrible in the first place. But traffic has only gotten worse in the last decade as more and more companies and people move to the region. So we found that a lot of companies and stakeholders, property managers, developers, whoever it may be, they're very aware of commuting related issues and how it affects their bottom line, similar to the information Jessica shared earlier. They know that it's insanely expensive to add more parking garages, or they're losing employees because of their long commutes. This is never shocking news, but they don't really know where to start. So TDM just kind of gets pushed to the back burner because their HR has more in their mind pressing issues. So our employer services program really seeks to meet that need. And we conduct targeted, proactive engagement of large companies and stakeholders to help them design a very customized commuter program, oftentimes from scratch, that's serving their unique needs and employees. So here's kind of the life cycle of that program. But what I'm going to cover today is the strategy behind it. So our program is informed by the fact that commuters are not a stock photo, for lack of a better word. They're very diverse. And no matter the industry or department or the city, people have unique needs and challenges. So if you target just the masses, a lot of people are going to fall between the cracks. So our goal is to find out why people do the things they do and what is it going to take for them to make a change. This isn't, that deceptive, manipulative kind of marketing that car companies, for example, our arch nemesis, have been doing for decades. But for our purposes, it's really just about reducing that burden of change. We're all out here to, see behavior change, but it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. So the focus of this presentation is going to be on surveying, because good data collection will help us do this. Segment the audience, step one. Tell us what matters to that audience, and then customize our marketing so that it resonates with people and we see a higher return on investment. So rather than telling people what to do, like you must carpool and bike 4 days a week, let's just make it easier for them to find a ride match or to purchase an electric bike or get their kids in a school pool or whatever that pain point is that's keeping them from, reaching that tipping point. So a clear and concise survey is the first piece to a puzzle in creating this commuter program that's customized for its audience. It's a simple tool, but it's very powerful if you get good data. So we already know how people are getting to work. Odds are they're driving alone, or we wouldn't be here having this conversation. So we want to ask the right questions that provide a clear pathway of how to build a program that will actually create change. The survey has a few functions. So one of them is to calculate a drive alone rate, and whether you measure SOV or VMT, you can ask the question respectively to that. But then we set a baseline mode share so that we have something to improve upon. So for example, Legoland had 59% of people that drive alone. This was their first survey. We now want to get that drive alone rate down to maybe 55% or 50% even at the next survey. But more importantly, the goal of the survey is to understand what is going to change people's behavior and how can we make it easy for them to leave their cars at home. So from the survey responses, we can see why people commute the way they do. Is it simply lack of awareness about their options? What are their barriers to trying transit? So we've got some open-ended questions. And every time I look into the results of a survey that's just closed, there's always something new that I hadn't seen before. Just reiterating the fact people are very unique and they have unique needs. One thing we stress to employers is that not every single person needs to upend their lives and start biking every single day. Again, we want a small but targeted audience of people that do have feasible options, but are also willing to make a small change if they're nudged in the right direction. So with a focused group like that, the company or TMA or city, whoever it is going to see a much higher return on investment if they choose to incentivize certain modes that make sense for certain groups. Another feature of the survey that's worth mentioning is to utilize GIS analysis. I'm not sure if you all have the capacity within your agencies to do this, but it's a pretty simple tool. And with this, we can identify clusters of areas that have a high potential for SOV reduction. For example, folks that live near other people that want to carpool or vanpool, or they live directly along a transit route and don't even know about it. So the map on the left shows plots of all employees who took a survey, and the map on the right is filtered down to people that are interested in transit. And then it's got some bus routes overlaid. And whenever we sit down with a green team or the HR person, they're most surprised to see the great far distances traveled every day by their employees. And this helps build a case for investing in programs that make sense for the groups who really do need them. So from there, we help the employers pick 2 or 3 programs or modes to focus on throughout the year. This creates our trip reduction plan. And again, targeting the right people is much more effective than just blanketed generic marketing. So at Lunch and Learns, we'll ask people, how much money do you think you spend every month on commuting? Maybe you in the audience right now can think about that. And even for those of us in the TDM world, I think we greatly underestimate the cost of having a car. So people say, maybe 150 bucks, maybe 200 at the most, but they're shocked to hear that on average, 20% of your income goes to transportation because they're not thinking about car insurance, payments, parking, occasionally Uber, Lyft, or speeding tickets. God forbid anyone ever gets those. And I also recently heard that loneliness causes the same bodily harm as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is pretty hard to believe. But that's actually what the studies say. So there's another statistic, like Jessica mentioned, that coincides with the wellness benefits of community, and carpooling and vanpooling can help us build community in commuting. People oftentimes, I think, just need to reframe the way they see their commute to realize there's even a problem in the first place and that they could benefit from making a small change. And again, our job is just to make it easy for them to shift their behavior. So I'm going to go through a couple of quick examples and then wrap up. Here's an example with the County of San Diego. They surveyed their employees and saw an interest in transit. So we helped them implement what's called a TriTransit Program. And that provided 30 days of free, unlimited transit ridership to anyone who qualified. Qualification being they don't normally commute on transit. So again, sometimes people just need that 3rd or 4th or 5th nudge to make a change, and the TriTransit helps them do that. So the results were pretty encouraging, as you can see on the screen. And region-wide, the program's been offered to about 25 companies, and we've seen on the individual level that 58% of people continue to ride transit, meaning that they reload the card with their own money and still regularly get to work on transit, and they had not done that before. So that's beautiful. Additionally, we worked with the local office of Genentech. I think they've got some big offices up north as well. And they've got about 1,200 employees down here and they wanted to take targeting to the next step. So they used a method called Kaizen. If you're not familiar with it, it's essentially a focus group of people that come together to create positive change. So the goal of this particular Kaizen was to revamp their commuter program. And they had a panel of interested commuters and then some third parties like the facilities team, sustainability people, and then iCommute, SANDAG sat in as well. And their challenge was to find a way to move more people from a nearby train station to their Genentech office about 5 miles away. So a tricky distance. And after weighing a variety of options like shuttles, electric bikes, the group voted to reallocate funding from their existing shuttle to a Lyft for Work program. And then the results of this, again, led to huge savings for the company, decreased the amount of people driving alone, and then the employees really did feel heard and cared about. So win-win-win. And just to wrap up, here are a few of the companies that SANDAG has worked with. It may have offices up in your area, but either way, I'm happy to discuss all this further. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So if you have questions or ideas, or you want to share what has or hasn't worked for you, I'm all ears, and my contact info is on the slide. And I'll just say that people are never more themselves than when they're laughing. So it doesn't hurt to weave an attempt at humor into your TDM program. We just have to laugh at how absurd this car culture is in the first place. So thank you all for your time. I'll hand it back to Adrienne, and please give me a shout if you'd like to talk further about this offline. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think that was a really good presentation. I really liked how you focused on focusing, because I think a lot of times we feel like we, have to do that one size fits all. We have to reach every single person and give the same messages. And just like Jessica was talking about the stages of change model, there really is an opportunity to kind of identify different commuters who have different needs, and maybe they are or are not commuters. Maybe they're going to or from school, or etc. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. So in keeping with this theme of measurement, we're going to transition back here to SACOG. Sabrina Bradbury is with us here in the office. She has managed the Transportation Demand Management Program here for the past 3 years and has nearly 10 years of experience encouraging travel behavior change. She led the update of the TDM strategic plan to move the program towards a focus on performance, measurement, and innovation. So Sabrina, take it away.
All right, thank you. And thank you so much, Jessica and Rachel, for getting us started. It's kind of nice to be the person that goes at the end, so I can incorporate and react to a little bit of what you were saying. And you also touched on a few points that I won't need to make, but just to give folks who may or may not be familiar, as Adrian mentioned, we did update our strategic plan, and performance measurement is coming up as a really key component that we haven't really focused on in the past in our TDM program, and very much on that VMT reduction portion. But Jessica, I really liked what you had to say about we should also be touting the other co-benefits of these programs. While we do, at SACOG, we fund our program with congestion mitigation and air quality funds, we do have to care about that VMT reduction most importantly, and what we're doing to reduce congestion and improve air quality. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be tracking those other important metrics. So I wanted to talk a little bit today. Actually, I'll give a brief overview of a couple campaigns, what we've been doing in performance measurement, and then talk about some TDM innovation grants, 3 pilots that were awarded for funds that we will be testing their impact on VMT reduction, and then some work that we are launching with UC Davis to measure the performance of the broader TDM program and all those different ongoing activities that, as Jessica mentioned, can be much more difficult in a lot of ways to measure the impact because there's not a clear before and after that you're doing, unlike a pilot or a campaign. So we have 2 campaigns. One, we rebranded our fall campaign to be Ready, Set, Ride just this last fall in October. And we worked with UC Davis to draft some follow-up survey, a follow-up survey that went out to participants. It was just through the online, it was an online survey. It wasn't anything that was very expensive to do, but we wanted to have them help us a little bit on honing in the questions to kind of get at, did this campaign really change your behavior? Did you try some new, new mode of transportation? So we had a little over 1,400 participants, and 574 took our survey, so it was a 40% response rate, which was pretty good. And 41% of those who took the survey said that they did try a new mode during the campaign. And not all of those were switching from driving alone necessarily, but we did find that in the 6 months before the campaign, 24% said they were driving alone. And then when we asked, what are you planning to do the next 6 months, only 16% planned to drive alone. So we did see a little bit of a shift, which was exciting. And then we actually tried to just dip our toe in the stages of change that Jessica mentioned by asking folks when they registered where they felt, and I can't remember the exact question, how we phrased it, but we tried to give an attitude that they held toward using alternative modes to see what stage they were in along that line from pre-contemplation to maintaining their activity. And we did see that 26% of the respondents moved along that spectrum. Now, there were a few that actually went backwards, which was kind of interesting. So I don't know if they just didn't remember how they responded, but most of it was in the positive direction, where they were actually moving toward making a shift or had already made the shift and moved into maintenance. So that was really interesting, and we're going to dig in with UC Davis a little more on evaluation there. And then for May is Bike Month, we want to take this whole thing a step further and do some really robust, more robust pre-survey work. So what other questions could we build into the registration process to see what are people doing now when they start the campaign versus the end of the campaign? And then also think about, should we be doing a survey to the broader public? There are people who surely know about the campaign but don't participate. Why aren't they participating? What may make them want to participate? Those types of questions. And then looking again at the stages of change and capturing those achievements that we're making, and actually that slow shift. We may not be able to claim as much immediate trip reduction and behavior change, but we can certainly argue that we're moving folks along that spectrum, hopefully. And then we'll also be looking at, can we do some pre and post and even during the campaign bike counts and marry that up with some survey work to see, what we can capture as far as overall biking increasing in a few areas. So that's what we're planning to do with our campaigns. And then we have these 3 pilots that we awarded grant funds to test some new ideas. We have an on-demand microtransit shuttle that's launching with West Sacramento. They're partnering with VIA to do, in a suburban area, some on-demand transit service using vans. And then we have a first mile, last mile to transit connection with our city, Rancho Cordova, that's partnering with Lyft, most likely, to do connections to light rail in particular. And then they have some local routes that they might want to amend to be more on demand, or kind of marry up with that depending on how the pilot goes. And then we have the Sacramento Air Quality Management District that is doing a pilot with one of our school districts, San Juan Unified, and they are working with an app developer, Carzac, to develop a school pool app that will function a little bit kind of like a TNC service, where parents would be the drivers, but it would be a little bit more on demand than your traditional school pool arrangement. And so with all of these, we are partnering with UC Davis and UC Berkeley to do some really robust before and after performance measurement. And then we will use that information to evaluate, did these pilots actually move the needle on BMT? Should they be expanded? Should we iterate and do something slightly different that might make them more effective? And then finally, we're doing this broader effort with UC Davis that has kind of been a slow start to get going as far as the contracting process goes, but we're excited that we're finally getting started on them developing a performance measurement plan for our TDM program. So they will help us look at what are the things we should be tracking, what metrics, what data do we need to collect, how are we going to do that, what does SACOG need to provide as far as infrastructure or survey tools or those types of resources that then partners could use to help us collect information and evaluate some of these ongoing programs, campaigns, and pilots. So kind of looking at what are all those different things, and then of course we'll be looking at the work that Jessica did with Transit Center as well. And we really kind of just want to see how far we can push on getting some firm numbers on what we're achieving in BMT, particularly for SACOG. Our modeling staff is very interested in how much can we claim because of our greenhouse gas targets that we're trying to meet. And so we've made some assumptions about what we think our TDM program is achieving based on some ARB, the Air Resources Board calculators, and TMA membership, but we want to get that to be a little more robust. And it's a really great time too with big data being I want to say getting smarter, but that seems like such a buzzword. But you know, the passive tracking, while it's still not there, there's a lot of movement there that's getting better and better all the time. And you have these big data collectors that are able to give you a little bit more info than we've had before about how people are actually moving around. We do have our household travel survey that's coming out that'll give us a good baseline snapshot in time, and that was actually, it'll be, I think we'll have the data in August of this year, and that was, it's collected through a passive tracking app, so that's also exciting because in the past we've done like a paper survey, and this will have more robust data than we've had before about all those little trips that you might not think of. I actually piloted it before we went out to the more formal pilot to test it. We just had some staff testing it. And things like walking from the parking garage, it was flagging as a trip. And I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that as a trip. But you have to think about what's the infrastructure you need for sidewalks, you know, walking your dog, all those things are actually trips that we don't necessarily think of as trips. So I think that it's a really exciting time to be diving more into this, and we will be able to use that data that we're collecting through the household travel survey to really do some great comparison work on our TDM program and measure their effectiveness better going forward. With that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Adrian for some Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Jessica and Rachel. I think this is really, really robust conversation and so applicable not just to cities or counties and not just to transportation management associations and not just to council of governments, but really to every entity that's trying to measure both projects and programs. And, you know, I think it's interesting because we talk a lot about new ways to collect data and efficient ways, but surveys are still kind of like the tried and true method. So, Rachel, I was hoping I could ask you just some survey logistics. So if you're issuing a survey, what is kind of the time that you keep it on the street, so to speak? Do you offer incentives for participating in surveys? And can you talk a little bit about the structure or length of surveys? I know that's kind of a hot topic because it's easy to ask so many questions, but sometimes that hinders people from responding.
Sure, yeah. So to start with the survey, we find out how many employees it's going to, and then we set a minimum response number from there. For example, if the company has 250 employees, we need about 100 to meet our margin of error threshold. Is a goal of 5% margin of error. So we can generalize and say 95% of this is accurate to 95%. So from there, we typically see that we meet that response rate in about 2 weeks, with a huge spike in the first day the survey goes out. Most of the time it's done electronically through SurveyMonkey, but of course we have employers that you know, are not based at desks, and so some of the folks are in manufacturing or out in the field, so we do paper surveys as well. But we see about 2 weeks is usually what it takes to get that response rate needed. We can always extend it too, but we do offer incentives. So again, with a company of about 200 employees, we can offer 5 $25 gift cards, and we put that in the opening slide. You'll be entered into a raffle for one of 5 gift cards valued at $25, and that's really what we credit our response rate to. People don't often take a survey for their own health or to be generous. They usually want something in return, and monetary incentive is the most effective way. And we conduct this survey. We recommend that a company does it after 18 months. So they do the first survey, set a baseline, kick off a program, launch incentives, do all kinds of events, PTV projects, whatever it may be, and then we resurvey in about 18 months. Some of them want to do it, you know, in 6 months or a year, depending on if they're trying to meet certain goals with their green team or whatnot. And then we only recognize that data as being valid for 24 months. So they have to resurvey in 2 years if they want to maintain their status that they earned from that survey, which is part of our kind of awards program, which I didn't get into, but I can chat more about that if you're interested. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how you talked about kind of consistency, right? Like they can have a little bit of flexibility when they want to do the post survey, but then you ask them every 2 years or so to resurvey. I think that's really a strategic and smart move and a great way to get the baseline data and then continue to get that information. Do you have a kind of source where you keep the survey information? Do you use kind of like a CRM database like Salesforce or something like that to keep track of all of this data? Or
yes, we have all the raw data stored in SurveyMonkey, but we've actually got a link to our CRM software, which is Salesforce, and we've got a customized platform on Salesforce that helps us calculate the SOV rate automatically based on the survey. So it's actually linked. We create a link in Salesforce itself. That link is sent out to employers, and they automatically toggle the responses into Salesforce, and that creates the average VMT traveled and then potential VMT reduction. It also calculates how many points they earn, because anything under, in our region, an 80% SOV rate we consider to be not too bad, which is sad because that's still quite high, but that just goes to show you how high the driver loan rate is here. And then it's all kind of, streamlined, and we don't have to deal with too much manipulation of the data. So yeah, using Salesforce has made our lives a lot easier, and we've got a really well-developed, customized version of Salesforce that I'm happy to share some more info about with anyone that's interested.
Yeah, I think that's, it's a great way to make our lives more efficient, and it kind of gets to the scale question, right? If you have a limited staff or budget or resources, using something like a Salesforce or CRM can really be helpful to help you calculate and automate, it sounds like, some of the information. So I think that's really helpful. Jessica, I was hoping you could also talk a little bit about surveys, because I feel like I remember you saying, surveys should be 1 page in length, or you should really focus on the length of the survey as to not kind of fatigue the participant. And I think, if you could also touch on that scale question, not just in terms of surveys, but in terms of all of the protocols you presented, is there kind of one that works better if you have really limited resources, like if you're a staff of 1 or 2, or you have very little money, or can all of these be scaled, and how would you do that? Is it just case by case? So if you could touch on the survey a little bit. And then before you jump in, Jessica, if anyone listening has questions, feel free to type them into the chat box.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to muse a little bit about surveys. 100% agree with Rachel. You've got to bribe people. And I actually think it's defensible to do that, not just for the participation rate, but because you don't just want to hear from the people who are motivated to participate in your survey because they already are advocate types. So it was funny, Rachel, when you said nobody just takes a survey. I was like, I do. I love taking travel surveys, but it would be disastrous if you had your entire baseline of people like me. So I think that by bribing, by offering people incentives, we can get, that's not a way to get fully representative samples, and that's not what I think either Rachel or I would propose you have to do. But it is a good way to get a more diverse pool of people. And in our experience, and this is backed up with lots of behavioral science, it's more cost effective to offer a raffle opportunity to get one larger prize than it is to offer everyone a small guaranteed prize or reward, or whatever your local funder makes you call it. So we tend to do a drawing. If you complete the survey, you'll be entered in a drawing for a 100. It depends on how badly we need to get our numbers up, ranging between $100 and $250 prepaid grocery gift card. We've thought really hard about what we can offer that is appealing to everyone. Again, if the raffle prize for taking your travel survey were, let's say, a free bike, we think that would rule out or not be of interest to lots of people, either because they already have a bike in this particular example, or because they're like, biking is not relevant to me, I prefer to drive. So we're trying to come up with something that is apolitical and isn't a lifestyle or identity marker. So everybody has to buy groceries. So that's why we've ended up with that. Alternately, we've had some success where we've had like really generous sponsors in being able to offer, let's say, a staycation package. That's a really different logic, right? That's more like, you know, a treat, right? But that has been really successful too. So in terms of getting your numbers up, I really recommend that. If you cannot buy or, you know, offer things of value, I know some government institutions have limitations on that, then I encourage you to consider what your own government agency or your partner agencies could offer. So for example, maybe you could have like a family pass to the rec center, or to like, you know, some sort of summer swim pass or something like that. So that's a little bit on getting your numbers up. Adrian, you also asked about like how many do you need, I think. And the answer to that is we don't use a rule of thumb because it depends on what you're trying to detect. So this is a little bit of a nerdy answer, but if you are trying to design your survey so that you can detect, let's say, a change in a mode shift, and let's say you're starting with, to make the math easy, an 80% driver loan rate, like Rachel said, and you think that you, among participants, might see a 5 or a 10% reduction in driving trips. I can't do the math off the top of my head, but we have a sample size calculator that we link to in the Transit Center report. And if you put in those sorts of inputs, it could tell you how many surveys you will need to be able to detect, to state with confidence that your results are statistically significant. So it kind of depends on the purpose of your survey, how many you absolutely need. And then you had also asked about like format and length. I think it depends on whether you're doing paper or web. I think people do have a bit more patience for a longer survey online than they do, you know, if they see a paper survey that's like a tabloid double-sided, they're gonna walk. So where we have to do paper surveys, and we often have to do bilingual, that's where we have the rule of thumb that it's like one side of the page only, preferably 8.5 by 11. If you absolutely have to, go to legal, so that you'd have, you know, one side of it being English and the other side being Spanish or whatever your secondary language is. Of course, you know, we rely on our graphic designers to pack the most into that in a way that doesn't stress people out. But I don't think I have an absolute rule for you about what you should spend that limited space on, because it really does depend on that particular program's priorities. But I will advise you that in addition to like hard quantitative stuff about like mode shift or trying new modes, make sure you stuff your ballot box with some feel-good questions so that if your hard numbers aren't as impressive as you had hoped, you can still come back to your boss and your funders with some positive results. And you will have positive results because I'm sure you're all doing really great programs. So example of like softball questions like that would be, do you think this was a good program? Or do you think we, government agency, city, or whatever, should continue to do this kind of program? Or, you know, was this participating in this program a positive experience for you? Most people will give you good responses to those. So I feel like I'm taking up too much airtime. Adrian, have I missed anything critical that you want me to come back to?
Yeah, thank you. I think that is extremely helpful. Thank you both. Jessica, I really like that you touched on it is kind of better to raffle for a chance at a bigger prize. And I know those seem like small questions compared to the big protocols and the big ways we're measuring results of our programs. But I do think those kind of behavioral aspects are really important, and especially, you know, broad incentives to everyone and keeping the length appropriate. And Rachel, you talked on the amount of time you kind of keep it on the street. So I have another question I would like to ask to Sabrina, and that's kind of where you go for help. So if individual organizations or entities are looking for support, can they come to the COG, the Council of Governments? Where would you recommend they start if they see like, oh, I am interested in the stages of change model, or I am interested in developing a survey, I just don't know how to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. And we at SACOG, you know, we are happy to give feedback on draft surveys. We may even be able to point you to existing survey work. I would probably point you over to Jessica's report with Transit Center, things like that that we've already looked at and are starting to do. With the UC Davis partnership that we have launched, we have additional opportunity to get feedback from researchers who are in this performance measurement field. So reach out to us if you're wanting some feedback on something on how to measure it, or just as specific as, I have these survey questions, can you see if the wording is right, or, you know, what different types of programs you're trying to measure. We'd be happy to help on that front as far as shaping a performance measurement, and it's very timely with the work that we're launching that we can put some additional resources to it for you.
Yeah, and probably the TDM listserv too, that Cutter, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, puts on, might be another good resource if you have questions or comments, or you have something that you want review. I mean, it's kind of a group of experts. I know that Jessica actually puts on there a lot, so I think that might be another good resource. So a question for the group before we get to the audience. So what if you're not really seeing the results, reductions in VMT? Can you still claim, you know, survey results that are not showing reductions? Can you still claim that as maintaining, you know, your mode breakdown, or do you need to kind of start from scratch if you're not seeing those type of results?
Do you mean results as in when you conduct a resurvey and you are not seeing a drop in SOV? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, if your mode split is staying the same and you have these ongoing programs, how do you go about capturing what you might be achieving, you know, that the drive alone rate might be higher if you weren't working with that employer and that employer wasn't offering benefits?
Sure. I don't know if you want to jump in, Jessica. I would say that absolutely does happen. And that's reality. I mean, if you look at the cycle of change, people fall off of it. So ideally, we do see a drop, but quite often it's about the same. Or, you know, we can always say maybe the sample size was skewed, or people that, you know, saw the first survey, of course, are, you know, going to take it if they cycle. So we got an artificially high drive alone rate or a high mode share. But to that point, I would say, listen to what the audience is saying and ask those open-ended questions and really dive into what people's needs are. And the program probably does need to change. I mean, not every survey or every program we launch is going to be perfectly niche into that audience's needs. It takes, you know, sometimes a whole year of trying something and it not working. So don't be discouraged. Just try something new and keep changing it up and learn from your mistakes. You know, fail big, but learn from what you did wrong.
Yeah, maybe I'd add to that. I totally agree. I hope none of us are in the position of, you know, having to guarantee success, because I don't think that's realistic. A couple of thoughts. Make sure that you are tracking the larger context so you can compare the results of your program to global trends. So for example, if I were running a transit ridership promotion campaign and I saw 0 increase among my participants, and let's say I knew that they were sort of representative of the general population, I might conclude that my program failed. But as I'm sure you all know, transit ridership is dropping all around the country, except in 3 markets that have all done like pretty interesting transit stuff. We can talk about that later if you want. In the face of dropping transit ridership, you might argue that we're doing a tremendous service. We are keeping people from shifting from transit to SOVs, single occupancy vehicles, that could be enormous. You could have unlocked the secret that every transit agency in the country wants to know. So I think this, wherever possible, putting it in larger context is really important. I also think that making sure you do ask different questions in different ways to identify different aspects of your program might tell you, like, for example, this program wasn't that effective in overall mode shift, but when we dig into the details, we find that it was really strong in non-work trips. Well, that could be a positive finding. That might tell you to reorient the next phase of your program around non-commute trips, and that you have a really good program for serving that purpose. Or you might discover that your program is maybe helping people try out new modes, which is a huge success. That is really hard to do. You deserve all the gold stars, but maybe they have a really bad experience once they try that other mode for reasons that are out of your control. That, sadly, your local transit agency is offering a really terrible customer service experience, or maybe something else is going on related to bicycling. Maybe like there's construction everywhere and all the bike lanes are blocked, right? So that might teach you that your program is actually super effective, but that you need the larger context to partner with you to set you up to succeed rather than setting you up to fail. So those are just two examples off the top of my head, but making sure that you're sure your program doesn't work and that you've explored every aspect of the impact it might have had. And then I'd also challenge us all, though, not to be stubborn and not to have too much pride on the line. If our programs aren't working, let's revisit them. Let's fail faster. Let's try more new things, fling more spaghetti at the wall, but also give ourselves permission to change it up. And I hope that you will gain the support of your supervisors and your higher ups in that kind of a philosophy.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that's a great point, right? And you both touched on it, which is to kind of fail forward, and failure doesn't necessarily mean a failure. It's a lesson that we can learn from, and we are trying to implement that in our organization. So I think that's really good messaging. So Jessica, I know you had mentioned that your kind of final takeaway or big takeaway was the value goes beyond mode shift and congestion mitigation, because it's only part of the story. And if we tell more of that story, it could help set us up for kind of more partnerships and funding opportunities. Rachel, do you have a takeaway?
Yeah, I would say know your audience. And again, they vary greatly between work sites, cities, counties, age, demographic, income. It's all a wild card. So really know your audience, and to do so, conduct a survey.
Yeah, great. Sabrina, final takeaway from you?
Yeah, I think mine would be that a point that Jessica actually made in her presentation, but that came out when I was thinking about mine, was performance measurement really needs to be catered to the project that you're trying to measure. And so you're going to apply a different method for measuring the impact of a campaign versus something that's more ongoing education outreach, and to just be mindful of how you design that evaluation and what benefits you can claim from it versus something that has a clear before and after.
Yeah, great. So we're going to give just a few minutes for attendees to type their questions into the chat box. And a final reminder that the webinar is being recorded, and we will post it on the SACOG website and email it to attendees. Our contact information is on the screen, but we will also share that. We did receive a few questions that are pretty specific to Salesforce, so we're going to send those over to Rachel, and so you can contact her if you have questions about that. But I thank you all for this great conversation on performance measurement. I think this is really informational and applies to so many stakeholders that are both listening and not, and something that we can really glean from, especially in the Sacramento region. So with that, we'll give about 2 minutes for you to type in your questions before we close the webinar. Okay, we're not seeing any other questions come through, so thank you again to Sabrina Bradbury here at SACOG, Jessica Roberts with ALTA Planning and Design, and Rachel Forseth with SANDAG. Again, we'll be following up with an email with all of our contact information, and feel free to reach out to us. Thank you again for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers.